With that, I would like to welcome you all to the Massachusetts Open Space Network's 8th Annual Massachusetts Open Space Conference. The goal of this conference is to provide resources, peer-to-peer learning, networking opportunities, and project inspiration for members of open space committees, as well as anyone interested in or involved with local land protection. Funding for this event has been provided by the Massachusetts Working Forest Initiative in partnership with UMass Amherst and the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. Additionally, this year's conference has been collaboratively organized by the North Quabbin Regional Landscape Partnership, the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust, and the Trustees of Reservations. Again, we are recording today's webinar, and the link to this recording, as well as all the other recordings of this year's series, can be found by visiting massopenspace.org and specifically navigating to the 2023 Open Space Conference tab. I'm thrilled that you all have joined us today for the third webinar of the series, Land Conservation and Restoration Initiatives for Climate Resilience and Exploration of Case Studies and Funding Sources. Land conservation and restoration are critical components in mitigating environmental change. Within this webinar, we will explore how land conservation and restoration initiatives are being used to increase community and environmental resilience to climate change. Additionally, we will be exploring MVP funding opportunities for projects that have climate resilience goals. While today's case studies focus largely on the coast, the larger sentiment of strategic land conservation is applicable to towns and communities across the state of Massachusetts. I hope you leave this webinar feeling inspired, critically thinking about strategic land protection for resilience, with a vision for how land conservation and restoration and continued public access to green space can go hand in hand, and with information surrounding relevant funding opportunities. To help us accomplish all this, we are joined by three fantastic speakers: Nick Black, Mike Huguenin, and Courtney Rocha. Our first speaker today will be Nick Black, Managing Director of the Boston Waterfront Initiative for the Trustees of Reservations. In his role, Black oversees the organization's ambitious plans to promote and create thoughtfully planned climate-resilient open space along Boston's waterfront through planning, advocacy, and collaboration with private, nonprofit, government, and community partners. His focus is to leverage the trustees' 130-year-old legacy of land conservation, public and private partnerships, and placemaking on properties involving complex natural and cultural resources to create a spectacular new open space in the city of Boston. Prior to joining the trustees, Nick held a vibrant decade-long career in political activism and public service. He attended the University of Kansas, where he earned a bachelor's degree in political science with a focus on journalism. He now lives in Milton with his wife and 2 children. With that, I will turn it over to Nick, who will be speaking about the Piers Park 3 restoration project.
Thank you, Isabel. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you this afternoon. Just want to say a quick word of thanks, first for the invitation to be part of this conference. For all of you, for your interest and participation. It's great to see, just glancing down at the participation numbers, 168 folks here to talk about issues that are very near and dear to our hearts and very important. So really excited to be a part of this. So I'm going to walk through this, and then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But looking forward to the conversation. So first and foremost, as Isabel talked about right at the top, my name is Nick Black. I'm the Managing Director of the Boston Waterfront Initiative at the Trustees of Reservations. Many of you may well know, the Trustees is proud to be the nation's first and Massachusetts' largest land conservation organization. We steward many of the Commonwealth's scenic, natural, and historic assets for 130 years. We're also the largest private landowner of protected coastline in Massachusetts across the state, with 122 reservations in our care. Isabel, you want to go to the next slide? And we can actually probably skip forward to the one following that. But what I'm here to talk about today is our Boston Waterfront Initiative, which is part of our 5-year strategic plan that charts the course for our organization heading into 2023 as we begin our next strategic plan. Our goal with the Waterfront Initiative is to create a network of public green open space along the heart of Boston's harbor that is seeking to achieve the goals that you see laid out here on the screen. First and foremost, looking to create a world-class destination, iconic in its design, that supports the needs of the community, particularly from an access standpoint. A lot of talk and thought around environmental justice communities that goes into this conversation. We're really seeking to bring value to Boston's climate resiliency goals. And then ultimately, we're also looking to create a place that is both financially feasible in its creation as well as long-term care. If you go to the next slide, from the beginning, the trustees have really sought to create a place that could be considered a world-class destination. Iconic in its design, the park would become a place that locals would be drawn to for its unique amenities, and travelers from around the world would add it to their must-see list in a city rich with historical attractions. The High Line in New York City is an inspiration for our work. This groundbreaking infrastructure reuse project created an oasis amongst the urban landscape through bold design. Next slide. The trend of creating public open space out of old, unused industrial infrastructure, particularly along urban waterfronts, has really been getting momentum over the last 20 to 30 years, and includes some fabulous landscapes like Christie Field that you see here in San Francisco. As one of America's oldest port cities, Boston has an extensive inventory of unused marine infrastructure, rotting piers, disused dry docks, and crumbling bulkheads that line the water's edge, particularly in industry-heavy South Boston and in East Boston. The trustees have conducted an extensive site investigation to identify opportunities to work with both the city of Boston as well as Massport to reimagine some of this old industry and create places that will connect people back to the waterfront. Go to the next slide. Another source of industrial reuse design for us, for inspiration, I should say, is Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York City. Brooklyn Bridge Park is made up of 6 piers and a total of 125 total acres of space along Brooklyn's waterfront. Brooklyn Bridge Park is really what we think of when we think of a world-class destination. Boston, unfortunately, doesn't have 125 contiguous acres of space on the waterfront open for development. But that doesn't mean that we can't achieve a similar success. Michael Van Valkenburg is the renowned landscape architect who designed Brooklyn Bridge Park, and we've been fortunate to work with Michael and his team throughout this process in designing Pierce Park Phase 3. The next slide, from the beginning, we've really been focused on creating landscapes that offer natural edges and coastal ecologies that connect people with the water, that are really unique to Boston, as well as honoring our unique history. But to be successful, if you go to the next slide, we also knew that we needed to center our communities in this process. As we looked for new site opportunities, we were also looking to fill open space gaps along the harbor to provide access in communities where open space is limited. Most critically, we're looking for ways to connect people to the water, which was one of our founders, Charles Elliott's motivating principles in launching the Trustees. We continue to seek to answer Elliott's question, how do we make our waterfront an accessible resource for everyone? We think that's about establishing open space that serves the local community, but also attracts users from all parts of Boston, many of whom live very close to the water, but don't think of the waterfront as theirs and don't know how to find safe access to it. So if you go to the next slide, so we're thinking about what it means for how we engage with the community in site selection as we advance projects, as well as how we design these sites, focus on bringing the community in to provide feedback early on. And we're especially focused on how we bring diverse points of view, working with partners in underrepresented communities to provide feedback in creative ways. You'll go to the next slide. As we pursued a world-class design and engaged with local residents, the challenges and threats posed by sea level rise was always in the forefront of our thinking. In the winter and spring of 2018, Boston saw multiple nor'easter storms that caused major flooding along the waterfront and neighborhoods across the city. This happened in the wake of Superstorm Sandy that hit New York City just a few years earlier. If you go to the next slide, it's important to note that Boston was built out on flooded tidelands over centuries of development. Scientists have modeled sea level rise over the next 30 years and identified major flooding threats to the city, and most of which correlate directly with those filled tidelands. That means neighborhoods like East Boston are under major threat of inundation in the coming years. Go to the next slide. The city of Boston has conducted several planning efforts to develop solutions to this problem. First, in Imagine Boston 2030, Climate Ready Boston, and then more recently in the Resilient Boston Harbor Vision. Mayor Wu and her team are now urgently working to implement a Green New Deal for the city that addresses these threats. The trustees have contributed to the thought leadership around these plans, and natural green infrastructure solutions are seen as a priority for protecting Boston's coastline. Ultimately, these plans will require action and implementation, and the Trustees One Waterfront initiative stands ready as a strategic partner to achieve just that. If you go to the next slide, all of that initial work and engagement leads us to where we are today. Early on in the initiative, we saw the potential in East Boston to achieve these goals, specifically here at the Pierce Park complex. The trustees originally responded to Massport's request for proposal in 2017 to design and construct Pierce Park Phase 2. Our original concept included a plan for that derelict pile field of a pier that stuck out from this land that we've now come to know as Pierce Park Phase 3. While we weren't selected as designers for Phase 2, we maintain a conversation with Massport around the possibility, feasibility, and opportunity of creating additional park space at Phase 3. If you go to the next slide, after after considerable site investigation work through much of 2018 and 2019, we presented Massport with a few options that demonstrated the opportunity to build something truly unique as part of the larger Pierce Park. An unanticipated global pandemic disrupted our progress, but not for too long. In December of 2020, the Massport Board of Directors designated the trustees as the developer for Pierce Park 3. And that marked a new type of public-private partnership in the creation of open space in the city of Boston. Next slide. The basis for this project is that concept of industrial reuse, just like the High Line, Brooklyn Bridge Park, or Christie Field. The act of taking post-industrial sites and reimagining it as accessible open space. The image you see here is from nearly a century ago and shows the Pierce Park complex as it once was, a bustling connection of goods and people from all over the world. One of our objectives with this project will be to better understand the history of the site and work with the community to tell its story. That light-colored warehouse that you see on the right there is what Pierce Park 3 looked like in 1925. We're also aware of and sensitive to the fact that East Boston faces many issues and hardships right now, particularly around affordable housing, food insecurity, and others. With that in mind, we plan to move this project forward under an equitable development framework that will help us understand some of the unintended consequences of creating new open space and thoughtfully identifying ways to ensure that residents from East Boston stand to benefit rather than face harm from our efforts. Next slide. Following the official designation, we got to work to deepening our understanding of what the members of the community wanted to see in this park. We hired an East Boston native, Gabriela Ramirez, to lead our outreach efforts and to better connect with the neighborhood. Stunningly, Gabriela and her team were able to collect over 1,000 responses, both online and in person, to a design survey. And this rich collection of data formed the basis of our design work. If you go to the next slide, here's just a quick look at some of the responses. First, we were talking to people who loved parks and going to parks in their neighborhood either daily or a few times a week. And next, the response to how people typically engage with Boston Harbor was interesting to us, with over 84% of people saying they typically engaged by either viewing the harbor in a passive manner. There was, of course, a desire among residents to have more opportunities to actively engage with the harbor, which we'll see in some later responses about the desires for the future programming opportunities in Pierce Park 3. Next, we gave the respondents an opportunity to choose multiple design aspects of the park. Cultural events is something that came out on top, with the preservation of natural habitats and harbor views closely following. Access to the harbor was something that we heard again and again, and underscored the desire of people to do more than just view the harbor, as we saw in the previous question. Next, and finally, there were a number of open-ended questions that allowed us to create fun and informative word clouds. If you go to the next slide, we also have asked what types of programming would attract folks to Pierce Park 3. And we see cultural events, nature play, and exploration leading the pack here, with a good amount of interest in other educational events and food and fitness related activities as well. We gave the respondents to take we gave respondents the option to take the survey in either English or Spanish, and over 20% of our responses were returned in Spanish. If we go to the next slide. All of this feedback, along with a number of design and programming charrettes throughout 2021, responded to the conceptual design that you see here. While met with enthusiasm, we had more work to do. People wanted to see more park, a larger land footprint within the pier. Questions were also raised: how do we create a more robust marine habitat? How can we preserve more of the site's history? How can we provide a more robust access to the park? We go to the next slide. The biggest question for the trustees and for our designers and for Massport was, how do we better integrate phase 3 into the larger Piers Park complex? If we go to the next slide, the design team has been working on taking all of this feedback and survey data and incorporating it into their ongoing iterative design process for the site. Design options have included a resilient landform, allowing the design to feature popular suggestions, including access to the harbor, resilient landscapes that are responsive to sea level rise, and the preservation and creation of natural habitat like salt marshes. The edge of the park is not just a line between land and water, but the entirety of the tidal zone. We know that the footprint of the park will vary greatly between high and low tide, and the opportunities for programming might also have a relationship to those daily tidal cycles. As a result, there's a tremendous opportunity to incorporate a living shoreline into this design. The team is also working to incorporate habitat creation and tidal pools to emphasize passive recreation as well as the enjoyment of nature. You go to the next slide. Shown here with the current Piers Park and the future Piers Park 2, we're looking at creating nearly 15 acres of connected, accessible green space on our waterfront. Piers Park is being designed to feel like one park with unique experiences within. Phase 1 will remain the more passive section, with phase 2 intentionally designed to be active with large open green spaces. And that gives us the opportunity to create a unique and immersive landscape that provides unparalleled access to the harbor, all while feeling like a part of the whole of Piers Park. Go to the next slide. This rendering is an example of the type of access to the water we would be looking to provide. At high tide, it offers a quiet place to sit and enjoy a meal or the company of a friend. Then if you go to the next slide, you can see as the tide goes out, a tide pool, purpose-built from eco-friendly materials, is revealed to explorers young and old, beckoning them to safely shed their shoes and explore the New England ecology. This is just one example of the unique experiences Piers Park 3 will provide. We go to the next slide. Looking ahead, we will continue our robust community engagement experiences throughout the duration of the project. Our next community meeting will be scheduled for sometime in the spring, and I would encourage you all to go to onewaterfront.org to provide your own feedback about the design, as well as follow along there. We're really excited with the progress that we've made so far, but there's still much work that lies ahead. And we look forward to sharing that progress with all of you. A final note, just to cover a topic of this particular webinar is the idea of funding and how we're looking to pay for this park. And so this is one where we're first working to determine exactly how much it's going to cost to build out the park. Right now, the estimates are approximately $44.5 million worth of capital construction costs. To date, we've raised about $32 million in philanthropic contributions for that construction. So there's still some ways to go, but a really great start in terms of the fundraising efforts. A vast majority of that comes from private philanthropy, whether it's through family foundations, individuals, or corporations. We have seen a little bit of funding both from the federal government. We received a $2 million earmark grant from the congressionally directed spending in 2022 as well. There was a $2 million grant from the state towards that overall capital cost as well. So a big part of what we're working to do is finalize the design and get ready to finish that fundraising here in the next year or so, with the idea that we'd be able to start construction sometime, hopefully in early to mid 2024. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Isabel.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. That was fantastic. And I can't wait to follow along and see how this project continues to develop in the coming years. So please feel free to type any questions you may have for Nick in the chat, and we'll answer them during our Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. While Nick spoke about a restoration initiative for resilience, our next speaker, Mike Huguenin, president of the Mattapoisett Land Trust, will be addressing land conservation for resilience via the Pine Island Pond Watershed Project. Mike volunteers with the Mattapoisett Land Trust and serves as president. He is active in land conservation, both with the MLT and the Buzzards Bay Coalition. He retired to Mattapoisett in 2010 after a career founding and managing an environmental consulting firm based in Cambridge. Today, he is married with 2 grown sons and 2 grandsons. With that, I will turn it over to you, Mike.
Great, Isabel. Thanks very much, and hope everybody can hear me. Thanks for joining us, and Nick, thanks for that presentation. As Isabel said, I spent 40 years living and working in Cambridge, and still spend time in East Cambridge by the river. And what's been done to increase public access and green space along the Mystic River, the Charles River, and Boston Harbor over the last 40 or 50 years is really fantastic. So shout out to the trustees for your leadership, all the conservancy groups, and Mass DEP Chapter 91 and Mass DCR. Great job, and very inspiring. So let me talk a little bit about the Mattapoisett area. Go to the next slide, please, Isabel. So if you're not familiar with Mattapoisett, we are a small town on the northwest shore of Buzzards Bay. Probably couldn't be more different than the Boston Harbor area. You can see some statistics about us there. We do not have an open space committee in Mattapoisett. As a practical matter, our land trust fulfills that function and have worked very closely with the town over the almost 50 years we've been in existence. Mattapoisett is vulnerable, like most seacoast towns, to climate change in 3 areas. One, of course, sea level rise. We can see the tides getting higher. If you've lived here a long time, as I have, I first came here in 1984. The tide is definitely coming up. We are seeing more intense coastal storms, both hurricanes and winter storms, and more intense rain events, which we are a town full of streams running into the harbor and bay and the Mattapoisett River, one of the major tributaries into Buzzards Bay, which provides the aquifer beneath it provides drinking water for 4 towns. So go ahead to the next slide, please, Isabel. Conservation in Mattapoisett. Our land trust was founded in 1974. It is a volunteer organization. We did add our first full-time paid staff member just last year, about a year ago. We protect right now about 900 acres of land. Our land on the map you're looking at is shown in the kind of pinky purpley color. The Mass DCR, Mattapoisett River Water Supply District in blue, and other conservation groups like the Buzzards Bay Coalition and the Wildlands Trust. Some of their lands are shown in orange and yellow there, but we've got about 35% of the town in conservation, which we're very proud of, but there's more work to do. And going forward, the question for us, and what's relevant, I think, today to this webinar is, how do we conserve land in a way now that really builds our resilience to climate change from both a community and environmental perspective? So I want to talk about a project that I think does that. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Isabel. So our Pine Island Pond Watershed Project, we completed this. We've been talking to the owners of this land that you see outlined in red on the screen here on the map. I know last week's webinar talked about landowner conversations and approaches. So we've been talking, the Mattapoisett Land Trust, not me personally, but the Land Trust has been talking to the owners of this property for over 20 years, on and off. It takes time to put deals together, and that's a topic I won't delve into too deeply, but I'm sure you talked about it last week. What's special about this property, it's 120 acres. It is directly abutting 300 acres that our land trust already owned, making over 400 acres of wildlife habitat and conservation land. And I know the audience here, I mean, we're all active in land conservation. Big chunks of habitat are far more valuable than little chunks. So the one appeal here was to be able to add on to a very large area we already conserved. I mentioned already, Mattapoisett's a wet place, lots of wetlands, many streams flowing down into the harbor and Pine Island Pond. There are extensive and quite healthy right now salt marshes around Pine Island Pond. That's not the case all through the southeastern part of the state. We've got a lot of problems with salt marsh dieback, but this is a pretty healthy area. There is a very valuable shellfish resource in Pine Island Pond. The town grows oysters there, which we use to seed other areas in town, and there is an active both quahog and wild oyster harvest in the pond. And one thing hard to see on the map, but we'll talk about more in a few slides, this land acquisition surrounds Angelica Avenue, which is a town 2-lane road, very vulnerable to climate change effects. And that road is the only way into 2 communities that have about 120 houses. So we've got residents out there who are vulnerable to being cut off in any kind of storm that damages Angelica Avenue. Next slide, please, Isabel. Here's just a quick view so you can see what this looks like. This is a drone shot looking southwest. You see Pine Island Pond, you see the shoreline, you see Buzzards Bay in the distance. If you look really hard, you can see the Elizabeth Islands, Nishan and Nashawina. Where the glare is on the right side, if there wasn't so much glare there in this drone shot, you'd see Cuttyhunk. So that's what you're looking at, the beautiful site of Buzzards Bay. You can see the extensive salt marshes and the coastal forest. And we're right over the major stream that leads into Pine Island Pond. That stream has a very large watershed and a very important stream for a town. We'll talk about coastal adaptation in a few slides, but you can imagine as sea level is coming up, salt marshes will be migrating right up into these forest lands and up the stream bed here. So I hope this gives you some sense of what we're trying to protect here. Please go to the next slide, Isabel. So are these lands vulnerable to climate change? Well, you probably know the answer to this already, but let me show you a couple of things. On this map here, I'm showing you here the Commonwealth biomap predictions of hurricane surge inundation. And the green color, the light green, is a Category 1 hurricanes surge. Outlined in blue is the Pine Island Pond land project, the 120 acres that we purchased. And you can see that even in a Category 1 storm, you're pretty well inundated. And of course, the 2, 3, and 4 storms shown in darker green, yellow, and red really do a number on these lands. You can get a sense from this map that even sunny day, what's called sunny day high tide flooding, is going to start to overtake these areas within the next 25 years, we think. So I don't show a map of sea level rise forecast. We have those maps thanks to the good people at the Mass GIS project and Biomap 3, but very vulnerable to both sea level rise and storms. What's harder to envision is the more intense rain events, but we think we're going to see more flash flows and flooding on many small streams come down through these lands. And of course, having them in conservation lets us tend to that and keep infrastructure and investment out of harm's way. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Angelica Avenue, the sole access route for 130 homes, goes through here. If you squint hard, you can see it on the map. And that's certainly vulnerable. So these lands were very vulnerable to climate change. And that was one of the reasons that we worked so hard for many years to try to put them in conservation. Next slide, please, Isabel. So let's talk a little bit about the environmental resilience aspect of this, and a couple of maps here to show you. This builds environmental resilience for our town, we think, in a couple of different ways. First, we're protecting wildlife habitat. This has significant areas of NHESP mapped habitats. You can see, again, I don't know if this is clear unless you're looking at this in a on a big screen, but there's both priority habitat and critical, or rather core habitat involved. Virtually the entire 120 acres is one of the biomap 3 categories. So very important for wildlife habitat. And again, I mentioned adding this land to the 300 acres we conserved to the north creates over 400 acres of really beautiful wildlife lands. We also protect the healthy salt marshes that are around Pine Island Pond and in the southern border of these lands. Salt marshes are important. I probably don't need to say why to the audience here. Some points are there. But importantly, what we're doing here is allowing conservation land to be the route of migration for salt marshes. We know we're going to lose all of our lower marshes. That's a hard, cold fact that we have to confront on the coast. The salt marshes are going to retreat upland if we let them, if we don't put barriers in their way. And in this case, salt marshes will retreat right up the stream valley there you see. So we wanted to make sure that we don't allow development to get in the way of that, because we don't want to lose salt marshes in Buzzards Bay. We know they're going to move inland. We want to help them do that. And then, of course, having forested and undeveloped land really protects the nearshore waters in Buzzards Bay from runoff and pollution from development. So that's another key factor in the environmental resilience building. Next slide, please, Isabel. Community resilience. What's in this for the community? Well, public passive outdoor recreation. This map here shows you our trail map for the 400 acre complex we created here. And you can see about 7 or 8 miles of hiking trails here. You can see, well, you can't see it unless you squint, but there are several areas where people can park along roadsides. There are kiosks with maps. All these trails are in Avenza maps and all trails. So we make this extremely accessible to the community who want to go hiking in the woods, walking in the hoods. These lands are open to hunting by legally licensed hunters. They are a mecca for bird watchers. We maintain about a 20-acre wildflower meadow in part of it. All of this yields great benefits, I think, to the public who use these lands. During the COVID pandemic, we saw a tremendous increase in folks using these lands, and every planning process that the town goes through, we just recently completed a master plan update. Public respondents clamor for even more outdoor recreation space and places to get outdoors. So we're trying to provide that here. The land project also creates some flexibility for developing a sustainable design for Angelica Avenue, the road that I talked about that leads to the only route to 130 houses. Because conservation lands now surround the most vulnerable part of that road, we can have more control with the town, our partner here, in what kinds of infrastructure get built. Angelica Avenue is going to have to be improved to withstand sea level rise and more intense storms. But how we do that, we now have enough land around it that we can really fully think about green solutions, soft coastlines. Yes, some elevation increases will be needed, but minimal armoring, I hope, and very good flow underneath whatever road is made so that we can keep the salt marsh migrating to the north. That's much easier when the lands are in conservation, I think, rather than in private developers' hands. Another good part of the project this project built a coalition for reopening a second access route along Old Slough Road. That's a road you can see there circled in orange. This is an old road that had fallen into disuse. This road was accepted by the town first in 1810. It has fallen into disrepair over the last 50 or 60 years. It's now a cart path or hiking trail, but not accessible to vehicles. While the land in this particular deal didn't abut that road, the conversations with the community around the fundraising and the development of the Pine Island Pond project really led directly to an effort that we're undergoing now with funding from the Coastal Zone Management Office of the Commonwealth to get that road rebuilt as an emergency access route and a good hiking trail for mobility impaired folks into Mattapoisett Land Trust lands. And then obviously the last thing, we understand on the coast, at least some of us do, that we need to retreat from some areas. Sea level rise is coming. Storms are coming. Some of them have been here already. Part of that retreat is we've got to limit the built environment in vulnerable areas. And sometimes, you'd think maybe zoning or flood regulations would do that, but the sad fact is they don't always. The best way, I think, to limit the built environment in vulnerable areas is to get that land in conservation. So that's how we've tried to build community resilience with the project. And go ahead to the next slide, Isabel. So a couple of minutes here about the structure of this transaction, and then I'll conclude. Basically, this project, the land trust purchased these lands, but because it's coastal land, as you can see here, the numbers are pretty stunning, at least for us. They're not the $45 million that Nick was talking about, but for our little town and our small all-volunteer land trust, these are big numbers. We were able to negotiate a $1.6 million purchase price. And then with closing costs and appraisals, environmental scans, surveying, all the rest of it, you really need about $1.65 million. How do you raise that kind of money as a small land trust in a small town? Well, a great shout out to Courtney and her program, because the MVP program was just getting going when this opportunity came up. We were able to secure a $960,000 grant from MVP. MVP, as Courtney will say, provides grants to towns, but the town doesn't own this land, the land trust does. So the way we actually make the transaction work is that the MVP grant provides money to the town, which they then pay to the land trust to buy a conservation restriction on the land. And so we like to double protect our lands anyway. With lands that we own in fee, we try to have a conservation restriction also on the land by another organization like the town or the Buzzards Bay Coalition. And that, in this case, the holders, the town of the CR, and the funding for that came from the MVP program, about, as you can see, roughly 2/3 of the needed money. The town also provided some general funds out of tax revenue, and we were able to raise $440,000 of private donations, one of the biggest amounts of money we've been able to raise. But I think it speaks to the importance of these lands and the wide recognition in Mattapoisett that these were just critical lands that had to be conserved for the wildlife benefits, for climate resiliency benefits, and for the use of the town. So let me close there. I'm happy to answer questions during the question and answer session. I see a number of chats are talking about why we allow hunting on the land. I'm happy to talk about that. We think that's an environmentally sensible thing to do. But I'll close now. Thanks for listening, and please let me know if you have questions.
Thank you, Mike. The conservation of the Pine Island pond lands is an excellent example of the power of community collaboration, as well as exemplifying the impact that open space conservation can have on both ecological and human communities. As a quick reminder, please feel free to be typing in the chat any questions you may have for Mike, and we will answer them during our Q&A segment. As mentioned in Mike's presentation, funding for the conservation of the Pine Island pondlands came in part through an MVP grant. Today, our final speaker is Courtney Rocha, who will be providing us with more knowledge surrounding the MVP grant program. Courtney is the Southeast Regional Coordinator for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. She assists Commonwealth municipalities with grant administration, technical assistance, building partnerships, and sharing adaptation lessons learned across the state. Her background is in coastal engineering, and in her free time, she owns and operates a small family farm and loves to be out on Buzzards Bay. I will now hand it over to Courtney.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk about the MVP projects and how we can get funding to these land protection and conservation projects. Next slide. So there are 6 of us across the state, and we provide technical support. We can provide assistance in making your applications competitive, and we help manage and provide technical assistance throughout the grant. So if you are interested in MVP at the end of this, find out what region you are in, and I highly encourage you to reach out to your regional coordinator. Next slide. So I'm going to go over what the MVP program is, how do you become MVP certified, what makes really competitive action grants in our program, and then I thought I would focus on some case studies for land acquisition because that would be what this group would be most interested in. Next slide. So for MVP, there are 2 pockets of funding. There is the planning grant, which gives communities around $15,000 to $30,000 to go through a prescribed planning process where they work with the community and identify what the community's top actions to address climate change in their municipality are. The final product is a summary of findings or a planning document, which the community would then use to apply to action grants. And then action grants fund anything that has to do with climate change. You just have to go through the planning grant process to be MVP certified to be eligible for action grants. And these can be up to $3 million per municipality, and we have at least 20 million available in the next funding round, but I'll talk more on that later. Next slide, please. The reason I'm not going to spend much of any time on planning grants is because if you are here today, your community is most likely MVP certified, as 97% of the Commonwealth has undergone the planning process. And you'll see every town in blue, dark blue is MVP certified, light blue is ongoing, and this is actually a year old. So almost every single town or a city in Massachusetts, except for one actually, is MVP certified. So if you're interested in finding your planning document, it's on our website and you can see what your town or city's top priorities for climate change are. Moving on. So that brings me to action grants, which is what Mike was talking about earlier. Next slide. So our action grants fund a whole host of climate change issues that show support from the community. And our program is based off our 9 core principles, which are directly related to how we score and evaluate projects. So they offer multiple benefits to a cross-section of the community. They have lots of community engagement. They are supported by climate data. They think beyond borders, they're regional projects, and they're innovative, transferable, and we really prioritize nature-based solutions as part of our program. Moving on. Next slide, please. And so we fund 3 different buckets of projects. We can fund planning, assessment, capacity building, and regulatory updates. We'll fund design and permitting or construction and on-the-ground implementation. I will say that design and permitting is its own funding cycle. Usually we won't fund design and permitting and construction or implementation. at the same time. So you have to have all your permits in hand before you apply for construction through MVP. Next slide. So what's new? We increased the cap from 2 million to 3 million per municipality for individual projects. And then if there's more than one more than one municipality involved, you can receive up to $5 million. Right now, we have a land acquisition that is $4.5 million between multiple towns that I'll talk a little bit more after. And then we require a 25% match, but this is lowered to 10% in Massachusetts economically disadvantaged rural communities, which is listed in our RFR when it was released. So if you are interested, check that out and see if you are eligible for lower match. Next slide, please. So I'm not, the next are what you need to apply to our program and some requirements in our RFR. I'm not going to spend so much time in it, but I've highlighted what I think is important for land acquisition projects and things that you really want to focus on in order to be competitive. So first, if you are interested in applying for land acquisition, I would, sorry, the chats are going crazy, which is so great. That you would need a draft town meeting, city council vote language, and then you would also need the appraisal. The appraisal is really important. So if you want to apply for MVP, I would really encourage you to get the appraisal ball rolling for your land. And then next slide. So for land acquisition or nature-based solution projects, we really want to see how climate change will affect the project and why this parcel is important. I think Mike did a really great job of describing it has ecological benefits, it has flood storage benefits, it serves as an area for marsh migration. So having all of these elements as to why we must protect and preserve this land is important for your application. A lot of parcels are just at risk of being developed, which is difficult, but that is not a reason enough for MVP to really want to step in and help fund the project. And then you'll need a clear budget and a clear timeline because these projects are some of our biggest asses and asks in the MVP program. So knowing exactly when it's going to take place and demonstrating a clear path forward is important. Next slide. And nature-based solutions and environmental benefits is one of our highest priorities in the program. And in our RFR, it is you're eligible for the most amount of points. And so by points, I mean, we select projects based on how well they score in their application. And the bulk of the points is in nature-based solutions. So land acquisition and protection tend to go really well here because in terms of climate change, there's not a lot of, we still aren't quite sure of how to naturally protect our spaces rather than just conserving them how they are right now, right? Restoring them is much more difficult than protecting them initially. So making sure you pay attention to this section of the application and describing all of the things I said earlier about different ways that this can serve as a climate resilience for your community. And then we also prioritize environmental justice and regional public benefits. And the way I describe this section to applicants is that we want to use MVP's funding to help the most vulnerable people and the people who are most subject to the impacts of climate change. And so that's environmental justice or vulnerable populations in your community. Now, if that is an eligible or part of the project, we want to use the funding to benefit the community geographically or population wise as large as we can. So really focusing on who are the people we're helping and how large of an area are we preserving and protecting with this funding. Next slide. This is budget and scope. MVP requires community engagement as part of our funding. So if you are having land acquisition, we want to fund site walks, we want to fund educational signing, school trips, ways to get people out and to the site and engaging with nature, and we require it, and we would love to fund it as part of that. I think that's really important to our program. Next slide. General project, general MVP grant program administration, please describe why this funding is so important to you and why you absolutely need it. And then note that you have capacity to take this over and what happens to land after it is acquired, and being able to describe what the maintenance path forward is like. Next slide. So here's some statistics from our last round. We received 135 applications and over 55 million was requested. And we were able to fund roughly half of those projects, 74 funded projects, and we gave out $32.6 million last year. The average grant size here is 447,000. I think that's skewed by some of the higher land acquisition projects. Generally, our grants are around 100 to 300,000, but we do fund bigger projects as well. Next slide, please. So this is important information for our upcoming RFR. We have at least 20 million available, 25% match, and it is reimbursement. It's submitted by an online form. The RFR will be released mid-March. We have a Q&A period for 2 weeks, and then applications are due 8 weeks after. The award announcement will be in August sometime, and then you would generally start work in September once the contracts are signed, and they can be 1 or 2 year grants. So if you have any questions, again, or interested, I encourage you to reach out to your regional coordinator to find out more about our program. Next slide. So here are some case studies I think would be of interest to the community, and please reach out to me if you want any more information. I'm just staying broad level, how much they were funded and what was protected, so you can get an idea of projects we funded in the past. Next slide. So it's a good segue from Mike's, is that we funded the town of Mattapoisett and working with the Mattapoisett Land Trust, $960,000. They were able to come up with the match with general town budget and significant private fundraising. And then he explained how the conservation restriction worked. And that's very similar to other land acquisitions we've done before, where the town would help purchase the land, but the conservation restriction would be held by another entity. Next slide. And that was the Pine Island was actually our first land acquisition. And then our second land acquisition was on Gosnold. We helped preserve 67 acres of land, which are circled there in red. And we funded them $1.4 million. And it was predominantly around their aquifer to protect their water and also protect redevelopment or development. And then the way this worked is that if the town was able to get this land acquisition going, a private homeowner or landowner would donate the land as part of the deal. So with the land that was acquired in the right, on the left, what's circled in orange was also part of the conservation restriction. So we were able to protect over 100 acres of land altogether. I think it was like 135. With the sound, my notes got disappeared and X'd out. So I don't know specifically, but this was a large wildlife part of the island that we were able to preserve. Next slide. And then here we're going to focus on some inland projects. So the town of Littleton, we were able to award them. we were able to award them $763,000 to purchase 22 acres of land in a vulnerable watershed. And then this allowed them to have a management of almost an acre of Phragmites. So this was used to protect, but also restore land as well. Next slide. And then in FY22, we funded the Richardson Green Conservation Acquisition, and you can see it's in red there, but it's part of a much larger preserved land, and we were able to award the $1.6 million. And they also used ARPA funds and their conservation funds as a match. So federal grants can be used as match for land acquisition projects. And this protected 21 acres in the Ipswich River watershed, and then it was part of a larger project. And you can see at the bottom there were so many different partners, different land trusts involved, and we found that successful grants have multiple partnerships within the community. Not only does it make the grant go smoother, but it also helps you have a stronger application when there's multiple parties involved and stakeholders supporting the project as a whole. Next slide. And now land acquisition projects have really caught on. And we have a lot going on in FY23. We have one in Berlin, 874,000, Stowe acres, 113,000, and that one protected, each of those protected over 100 acres of conservation land. The Middleborough project, which is in my region, we gave them 1.3 million, and it's 96 acres we were able to protect, similar to the Gosnell project where 96 acres were protected, and that also included another 189 of part of a total project of a farm. So it promotes food security, and also it abuts a river, so there's a buffer zone restoration and protection element to it as well. And then Mattapoisett coming back with the largest ever MVP grant, but also land acquisition for $4.5 million. And that spans over 240 acres of Mattapoisett, Acushnet, Rochester, and it's protecting their aquifer. And so they've worked with the Buzzard Bay Coalition to preserve land. And then last, I really want to emphasize Plimpton, and we gave them $500,000 to for almost 300 acres of turkey swamp. And before they were even selected, they used the Nature Conservancy tool to figure out what land would be most resilient to preserve. And Plimpton is a really small community. Most of the people I work with are volunteers. They don't have, they're just a bunch of community members working together. And so it's an example of a small community that really came through and was able to preserve a lot of land in their town. So next slide. So if you're thinking about land to preserve or protect and you don't know where to start, I think the resilient land mapping tool developed by the Nature Conservancy is really useful. It factors in so many different elements like drought resilience, connectivity, tree canopy cover, I believe, and it rates it from most resilient to least resilient. And you can see the little blue arrow is the Turkey Swamp project that Plimpton chose to preserve. So that's how they were able to select the land and move forward with us. Next slide. And if you are interested in other MVP projects or what we've done in the past, you can go to our website and see all the pink dots where examples of projects that MVP has done in the past. And we're happy to provide more information or connect you with other towns and cities across the state that have been doing similar work. Next slide. Thank you so much for listening to me today, and thanks for dealing with my audio problems. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you, Courtney. And I would encourage you all to try and connect with an MVP coordinator in your area, and we're providing the link in the chat and it's a place where you can access their contact information. So now with that, we will open up to our Q&A session. But before we do, I want to quickly review the format. As a reminder, you can raise your hand using the raise hand feature. A participant with their hand raised will be called upon to unmute. Additionally, we will be reading questions that have been posted in the chat. So if you haven't submitted one yet, please feel free to do so now. All right. And we will start us off today with a question for Mike. I'd like to recognize that dialogue around hunting has a lot of different opinions. Some people might find it slightly controversial, but I want to give Mike an opportunity to express his opinions and reflect maybe the opinions of the Mattapoisett Land Trust. So Mike, why is hunting allowed in these conservation areas? Is there a count of animals and birds killed by hunters annually? Before Mike answers, I'd just like to quickly remind you all, please feel free to continue having dialogue about these questions on our networking map. All right, take it away, Mike.
Sure, yeah. We have in Southeastern Mass, we have a problem with deer primarily. And so we have all of our forest lands that the Mattapoisett Land Trust owns have forest management plans that have been produced by professional foresters and have been signed off on by the state forester. There's a whole separate program where you can get some grant money to help you do forest management plans. When foresters and wildlife ecologists go through our woods, and when we walk through them, it's pretty obvious that we have an overbrowsed woods. And so the control of the deer population is a concern of ours. And the primary kind of hunting that happens on our lands is deer hunting. How many deer are taken each year? I don't really know. It's not, it does not seem so far to be working very well. This is a problem that the state is facing. And yes, hunting is controversial, but we feel it's the best thing for the health of the woods. Other animals that are hunted, there is some wild turkey hunting. There's some waterfowl hunting in the salt marsh areas. Again, we find some of the best conservationists and stewards are hunters. So we're very comfortable with opening our lands to them. We also ask that hunters leave no trace, and hunting stands, if they're installed, have to be removed at the end of the year. So we think that hunters are actually some of our biggest supporters, and so far we've been able to manage conflicts between hunters and other users.
Thank you, Mike. And again, please feel free to continue the dialogue about this question on our networking map. We have a bunch of other conference participants registered on the map, and it's a great place for you to access the contact information of these participants, and feel free to reach out to discuss this more. And now it looks like we have a question for Nick. This question is regarding sea level rise and the viability of the park. This person seems to feel there might be some conflict with rising sea levels and while we're restoring this park, and won't rising sea levels just inundate and ruin the park? So if you could speak a little bit to how you're mitigating this, and maybe talk a little bit about how the park is designed, again, to become inundated.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's an excellent question, and one that I probably could have done a whole other hour on if you all had the time and were willing to listen to me talk about it. Yeah, no, I mean it's a big piece of this entire conversation about what gets built along our harbor's edge. There was some talk in reference to managed retreat before, and how the idea that maybe we step back from the edge and allow for that interaction with the water. That's kind of what we're doing with this project. East Boston, as you might imagine, the whole of the city of Boston is really built up right to the water's edge. It's been built out over the water's edge over the last few centuries. And so with the sort of trends in rising sea level, what you see is if you compare maps of Boston from 1632 and maps of Boston in 2032, they start to look similar. In that a lot of the filled tidelands start to become refilled with water. And so the question is, what do you do about that? How do you prevent that from happening? How do you protect vulnerable populations that live in these neighborhoods? And one of the great ways that we've seen work and are really advocating for and trying to achieve with this project is allowing the park itself to be flooded, to know that going in that is going to happen. And so we're intentional in our design choices, in our material choices, in our planting choices, knowing that that's not a permanent condition. A lot of the sort of scary flood maps that you see are during storm events. And, you know, that is a reality, that there will be days that you aren't going to want to be in this park. That's probably because there's a nor'easter happening, or God forbid, a hurricane. But if we design the park and build it in a way to where that area can flood, but stops that flooding from actually inundating the neighborhood behind it, and then allows it to recover quickly once that water retreats and recedes, that I think is a real positive. And one of our primary objectives is thinking about how can we utilize natural solutions in open space to be part of this protective solution for the neighborhoods that can't easily retreat, or that doesn't have, you know, tens, dozens, or even hundreds of acres of land to preserve because it's already been built up and filled in. And so that's a big piece of this. And I, like I said, I've got a whole other presentation full of flood maps and sea level rise elevations that, you know, hopefully at some point we'll be able to get into. But yeah, no, it's a good question, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Nick. I'm seeing people wanting to know if the slides from this meeting will be available. I'll do my best to make sure I can find PDF copies of our slide presentations today, and they'll be included in a follow-up email that you all will receive shortly after today's call. I'm noticing we have a question for Courtney. Where can I find the MVP info to print out on the grant process? Do you have good printable resources that our participants could download and print?
So you can find more information at resilientma.org, and then you can click on MVP there for more information. We stay away from print because we are a climate change program. But if you are interested in a one-pager about MVP and what we do, you can email me and I can get that to you.
Thank you, Courtney. And to follow up with that, do you know of any MVP projects along the Connecticut River?
Any projects in general?
Yes, I think that's what our question is asking.
So I presented every land acquisition project or that we have funded so far in our program's history. But if you are interested in projects in a specific location, I would encourage you to go to our grant map viewer, where you can see it was that image with the pink dots on it, and that would show you all projects that we have done and geographically.
Thank you. Awesome. And Mike, I have another question for you. I guess we're curious, are there any ongoing restoration projects that are occurring with the Pine Island pondlands? How are you managing the increasing pressure of invasive species presence?
Yeah, great question. I'm happy to say that the bad news is the Mattapoisett Land Trust has some invasive species problems we're trying to deal with, but the good news is not so much in the Pine Island Pond watershed lands. That's a very healthy salt marsh. There's very little Phragmites in that marsh. There is some with Phragmites. When we find areas, we have some other salt marsh properties where we find areas that there's a stand of Phragmites that is isolated enough that if we eradicate it, it will stay eradicated. Then we've tried to do that. But on Pine Island Pond, it's pretty healthy. So the frag problem is not great. The woods there coming down the stream bed also are in pretty good shape. So it has not received a lot of attention from us in invasive species. And that's not because we haven't looked. It's just not a real problem area. If that changes in the future, we'll deal with it. But we actually expend a lot of effort on invasives, and we're lucky to have a volunteer who is a licensed applicator, so we can take action. Plus we raise money and spend contract funds on applicators. So certainly a consideration, but I'm happy to say part of the magic of this 120 acres is that's a problem it doesn't have.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And then for Nick, I know you briefly mentioned about expanding, enhancing habitat around the park. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about what you're imagining this may look like. Are you going to be providing increased bird habitat, maybe providing increased aquatic marine habitat through mollusks that can help filter and clean water? We're curious just to hear a little bit more about your enhanced habitat visions for this project.
Yeah, all of the above, all have been discussed and talked about. So I think there's a few different approaches that we're looking to implement here. I think first and foremost, it's the concept of the living shoreline is do we have the ability to reinstate salt marsh here, which is challenging because you have to get it at just the right inundation level. It has to be wet and tidal and interact with that water on a daily basis. And so that's certainly one of the main things that we're looking at. But we are also looking at having areas of the park that are really designated, instead of being, interacted directly and used by humans, but more observed by humans, whether you're in a kayak or something, to where particularly there are some older remnants of the pier that are actually already currently are actively used as habitat by shorebirds and other types of local species. What can we do to leverage some of those to actually enhance them, to create even more habitat, also using them as prevailing wave action breaks along the coastline. There's subtidal interventions that people have worked with, whether it's the eco concrete, which is specifically engineered concrete that allows for habitat growth on it, or things like oyster gaebons, which are those steel cages full of living oysters that not only help with wave inundation but also help actually clean the habitat too. Those possess their own challenges due to some regulatory laws in Boston Harbor with regards to growing oysters. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really great innovations happening right now. I think one of the things that we're really looking to do with this project is partner with people doing that work. So for example, the Stone Living Lab is a new organization that's operating out of Boston Harbor now, which are investigating these types of coastal interventions. And so we'll partner with them, because we see this really as an opportunity to create our own living lab of experimentation, because a lot of these new techniques are new, they're unproven, and this is a great opportunity for us to test out and start to shape what urban coastal intervention looks like moving forward. And so that's a big piece of this project as well. But yeah, if you have any ideas, any suggestions, please give me a shout. We're open to all sorts of things. I think they put the website on here earlier, but if you go to onewaterfront.org, it's got my email address and contact info. Would love to hear from anybody.
Awesome. And then I noticed we have a couple of questions regarding development. The first question I'm going to direct to Mike, and then I have a second question to direct to all of our speakers. But firstly, Mike, how do towns prevent more development in beachfront property?
Well, that's a problem. I mean, to be candid, you'd think that zoning and conservation commissions wouldn't permit stuff, but we could talk about this a long time. I mean, the FEMA flood maps are what the Wetland Protection Act follows. In my personal opinion, the FEMA flood maps are out of date. They don't line up particularly well with the hurricane inundation maps and with our own experience. Also, in our town, we're a town meeting form of government. There are lots of landowners, both small and large. It's difficult to get bylaws passed that take property rights away from people. We've tried numerous times to get a wetland protection bylaw in Mattapoisett, cannot get it done. Small towns, I think, are limited in their ability to do this in a way that you might call legislatively. And, I spent some time trying to make those things happen. And I finally decided, just as a volunteer who wants to work on these issues, if you want to save the land, raise some money and go buy it. It's maybe too bad that that's where we're at, but, at least in our town, there's very little appetite for government control of development. And I think increasingly as the years go on, I mean, as someone said already in the chat, it's quite clear we need to retreat from the coastline in some places. That's going to be a painful process. And, thank goodness for the MVP program and some of the other land conservation programs, because we can try to ease the pain by purchasing some of these lands and putting them to good use. When the time comes to remove people's houses from no longer sustainable barrier beaches where in our wisdom or lack thereof in the last 50 years we built, that's going to be a tough conversation. And as an older guy, maybe I won't have to be here, but a lot of you will. So that's not a very satisfying answer to me, but that's the best I can tell you.
Thank you, Mike. And then this next question that I'll pose for all our speakers is about solar development. I may recommend that we also take this question to the networking map, as I'm sure there's a lot of audience members who also have opinions about this, but are other communities being faced with allowing ground-mounted solar development while also simultaneously controlling such developments to protect forested land and preserving the climate resilience value of natural forest? This is a tough one, but I'm wondering if any of you guys have initial thoughts on this question. Additionally, again, I would encourage the person who asked this question to take it into the networking map because I'm sure they can gather a bunch of really great information.
Well, I can offer a little thought on that. I don't want to monopolize this, but in Mattapoisett, our land trust, we have a lot of ground-mounted solar development in town. It's taking down perfectly good forest to make solar when we have lots of disturbed land and roofs of every Home Depot, Kohl's, our high school doesn't have any solar on it. I think that the Commonwealth's solar program has done wonderful things. We need to transition away from carbon. There's no question about it. But the way that the Patrick administration's program set that up really created huge incentives for people to use land instead of disturbed rooftops, medial strips, lots of other things. So I'm very encouraged because if I understand it correctly, at least for our parts of the state, the regulatory authorities in this area finally will no longer accept ground-mounted solar in NHESP biomap 3 habitats. I mean, we fought one in Mattapoisett that was both in the hurricane inundation zone, which seems crazy to put this piece of infrastructure that's supposed to serve the public in a hurricane zone, and also was in priority habitat, or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't priority, it was core habitat. So the more recent regs rule that out. So large chunks of Mattapoisett that are biomap 3 mapped now are off limits to solar development. That solves a lot of the concerns we had, but all you need to do is take a cruise over Google Earth and look at southeastern Mass and see how much solar we've got, and then use the history function and go back and see what was on that land 5 years ago. So, the good news is we got to lose the addiction to carbon, no question. I think it could have been done better, and I think it will be done better in the future. That's what my 2 cents anyway.
Thank you, Mike. Do Nick or Courtney, you have anything to add? If not, I have 2 more questions I'd like to get to before we end our session. So I'll direct my second to last question to Courtney. Do you have any other diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice initiatives being incorporated into the program, in addition to adjusting the matching requests for Massachusetts economically disadvantaged rural communities?
Can you repeat the beginning part? Do we have any?
Yeah. Are you working, basically, essentially, how are you continuing to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in your work, in addition to the reducing the matching requests for mass economically disadvantaged rural communities? How are you making this an accessible option for people to choose and encourage frontline communities and give access to frontline communities to MVP grants?
So first off, we prioritize it in our scoring system. So projects that are in an environmental justice mapped community get more points, and they're lifted up in our scoring system. And then even more so about involving them in part of the core team, we really emphasize community liaisons. And there's more information on our website in our equity toolkit, which has so many resources about how to get communities involved in projects. But our community liaisons, really, we emphasize members of the community to be brought onto the core team and be paid for their work. just like we would pay an engineer for their time, we want to pay members of their community who give their time and to show up to these meetings and be a representative. So we really emphasize paying and putting in a line item in the budget when you request funding for MVP. And then we are also rolling out our planning process soon, so that will give communities a chance to update their planning grants. And this is solely focused on communities, because we're finding that people know what their infrastructure issues are, but we are an infrastructure, environment, and social resilient program. So our MVP 2.0, just a quick plug, keep a lookout for that. And we will be providing tools, trainings, exercises on how to equitably bring the community and vulnerable people into the core team and the overall planning for climate resilience within your town or city.
Thank you, Courtney. And I actually am running out of time to ask my last question, but I need to transition us into our raffle portion of today's webinar. Again, if we weren't able to answer your question, I'd like to direct you to our networking map, and the link to both the survey to get added to the map and the map itself are being put in the chat. And now we will draw the winner of today's raffle, which is an $80 gift card to Patagonia. And our winner today is, drumroll please, Pete Severance. Peter, if you could private message Julia Fitzpatrick with your email, we will have an electronic gift card sent your way shortly. And with that, I want to thank you all for attending and participating in today's webinar. And a huge thank you to all of our fantastic speakers. Again, the recording of today's webinar can be found on the Mass Open Space website under the 2023 conference tab. I hope this webinar has provided you all with useful information about a fantastic grant opportunity and inspired you to continue thinking about strategic land conservation and restoration for resilience. What lands in your community can be protected or restored to help vulnerable ecosystems and human communities adapt to the impacts of climate change? If you're interested in learning more about online mapping tools to help identify priority conservation lands in your area, I strongly encourage you to attend our webinar Biomap, the latest and greatest, being held next Thursday, the 23rd from 12 to 1 p.m. via Zoom. We are posting the link to a short evaluation survey in the chat, so please take a moment to fill this out. We always love to hear from you and use your feedback to improve upon the Open Space Conference. Lastly, be sure to follow us on social media to stay up to date with the Open Space Network. Thanks again, and I hope to see you all next week.